Hey guys, it's Q&A Tuesday and I have a very, very special one for you. And this one comes with a story right after the intro. So I received an email from a gentleman by the name of Nino. And the email address, as I looked at it, at the end said @google.com. What's my first reaction is to delete the email because I'm thinking this is one of those phishing emails, right? That you get all day, every day. I'm thinking, who's emailing me from Google, right? And then I realized this might be a real person because there was a phone number included. I called Nino and said, hey, what's up? This is Roman. Apparently Nino was a fan and somebody has watched my channel for a while. He's also part of a very, very special club, a humongous club of 700 plus guys that are all watch aficionados. I have Nino and some of the group members on a Zoom call with me right now as I'm looking at the screen. And I thought I would let Nino do the introduction in regards to his club, what they're all about. And then I'm simply going to jump into some questions directly from that live via Zoom. Hey, Nino, what's up?
Hey man, how you doing? I
Doing all right.
really appreciate the channel and you guys taking the time out of all of your schedules to meet with us today. So hey everyone, so I'm Nino. I'm a product manager at Google, and we have a very passionate watch club of people, and we call ourselves Watches at. And we're a watch club of Googlers, and it's a private group of kind of like horological enthusiasts that has no affiliation or sponsorship with Google or Alphabet directly. But as Roman just mentioned, when he and I were actually chatting, we were at around 700, and now at present day we're actually at around 800 something members. So it's been growing at a pretty steady rate, and it's kind of like we're uniting watch enthusiasts on kind of like this kind of collection of all the different pieces that we have out there that we have a passion about collecting over. And I think for us, it's not about price. It's not about what kind of like watch it is that you've gotten from whatever histories that you may have pulled it from, but it's about how do you feel about it? What are kind of like your passions behind it, and how can you actually share that with the group? And we're really all really excited about being able to be a part of this today. And we just want to at least say thank you for all of your contributions to the watch world, for all of us to get some of our information as how we're actually learning more about things on the gray market, how to actually buy watches. And thanks a lot for having me today.
Well, you know what? I am excited to have you and all of your friends. I do know a couple of guys by name because since I've met you, I've talked to a couple of guys that are on this channel. But there is one more thing that you guys are very passionate about. I love what you said about what you do in your club, because in reality, now, as I hear that, it's basically what I'm trying to do with my channel just the same. And that is to actually bring more knowledge to the table. And it's so easy nowadays with today's day and age of technology, and thanks to the company you work for, you can Google anything, right? I mean, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts and find out and get really super geeky on a watch, just Google it, as they say. But at the end of the day, what you can't Google is, hey, what goes on behind the scenes in these trade shows? You know, what are the actual values out there? You know, you got 9 out of 10 dealers out there that will try to sell you something as an investment, which these watches are not. They're expensive toys. They're great toys. They're wonderful toys. They're horological marvels. But at the end of the day, I try to bring forth the type of knowledge that, again, sorry, no pun intended, you cannot Google. And that's what my channel is all about. And I think by getting 700, 800 guys together in the same room with so many different watches, so many different passions and likes, I think you guys can manage to do the same thing and actually teach somebody like me a thing or two. Again, I'm going to ask you about the charity stuff. I know we talked prior to this. Obviously, this isn't our first conversation. And I think what you guys are doing is you're doing some really, really great charity work. I just wanted you to touch upon that for a second.
Sure, yeah. So I think it started probably around 8 months ago or so. A couple of us within the watch group came together and we decided, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we kind of like rallied around a piece that we could all buy together as a group? And so we kind of like teamed up with one of our trusted ADs, which is Reese Nichols in Indianapolis, Indiana. Quick shout out to you all. And with Nomos, and we tried to find like what is that right sweet spot kind of like watch. What would be something that a lot of people can afford? It's nothing which is too costly, but one that we really felt would be uniting for everyone together from a purist angle, something that had a mechanical based particular movement, an amazing price point, and with something maybe around like the Bauhaus kind of like design style. And we ended up on this specific watch, which is the Nomos Tangente 38 millimeter. So Ian, you can tee it up. I've sent you a couple of images. And essentially from there, we decided, hey, let's try to do 25, 30 kind of watches. Let's just see if it gets a lot of interest. The thing kind of went viral. No one had ever done anything like this before within our watches tribe. And we ended up selling around 187 of these things. And it was great because people were really excited and jazzed about it. But more importantly, then all of a sudden something came about, which was COVID, which kind of changed our entire scope of like how fast we were trying to move forward with the effort and everything. And just a hat tip also to Nomos, their watchmakers and engineers worked around the clock, and they actually were there in Glashütte, and then they even figured out how to get us our watches and actually finished the entire production line even during COVID. And so everything was done, and then we decided, you know what? They decided as a token of appreciation, hey, let's gift Nino number 000. And I had already purchased 001.
Guys, I wonder how that went by you. How did Nina end up with 001? That's what I want to know. Is he the president? What's going on here? I mean, it's like, oh, I already got the 001. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the number 000, we decided,
okay.
I decided, hey, let's actually raffle this off, and let's try to use all of the funds that we could possibly raise at Google and use it for charity. And so that's exactly what we did, and we raised over $13,000. And here locally, at least in the Bay, where Google is, we used around $6,000 or so of that directly towards the Hayward food parish here locally. We went to Costco, and we actually bought over $6,000 worth of food. And Costco actually goes quite a long while, so you can stretch that pretty far.
So Nino sent me some images of like, well, how many eggs was on that picture you sent me?
300 dozen, actually.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop up some of those pictures into this video as well, Ian. If you could do that for me, that'd be great. Because when I saw that, I've never seen 3,000 dozen eggs in one place. That was pretty amazing. For those of you guys that have watched my channel, you guys know I'm all about charity. If you guys remember the video I did, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months ago, I gave a Rolex away to a veteran. Well, guess what? That veteran actually was in my office yesterday. Still camera shy. I didn't even ask him if he wants to be on video because I told him that's not the reason why I gave him the watch. You know, from a marketing perspective, it would have been great to have him next to me, have a follow-up and talk about this, but I really just sat with him for about an hour and a half. So I feel charity is something that's near and dear to my heart, always has been, outside of giving locally to various organizations, giving globally to things like American Cancer Society. This is really, really up my alley, and I think when I met you, and that was the first story that you tell me, that I love that about what you guys do collectively as a group, and I thought that was just a wonderful, wonderful gesture, and I hope it continues on. Hopefully you guys can reach out to other brands and maybe go as high as Patek Philippe. Maybe they'll make you a Grand Chime number 00. Might set you back about 10 million, but that's okay. So Nino sent me a document, and that document comprised of basically a storyboard of what we're going to be doing, because again, we have a lot of people on this video, and we needed to have an idea how this is going to go. So a bunch of questions, because at the end of the day, this is kind of a Q&A. That also brought Adrian, because some questions, especially if you guys want to nitpick at market pricing and where the market was a month ago or an hour ago, this is your guy, because this is the guy that's in it on the daily as far as buying and selling. I would rely on him a lot more when it comes to pinpointing certain market prices, especially on all the hot stuff that's selling like hotcakes. This is a Q&A, so let's get some questions under our belt. Who wants to go first?
Let me just kick it off over here. So Roman, here's my question. Breguet is actually known for its kind of like development of the tourbillon, right? As we all know. And so like Lange is primarily for their kind of like immaculate style of perlage and their finishing, right? And if you actually had the opportunity to choose your own eng and design team, what would be the next advancement that you think the watch world would actually benefit from with advancements in tech?
With advancements in tech, what you're seeing, and this started already probably in early 2000s, right? You saw a small introduction where you're taking old school technology and you're modernizing it, right? And that was probably introduction of digital watches, right? The Digrizzogana Doppio was probably a good example of that, or the Digrizzogana Digi something or other they called it, right? If you look at Lange, right, their digital display time, right? If you look at some of the other pieces, what they're starting to do is they're starting to slowly but surely mimicking modern technology that requires a power source to run a watch, right? What I would love to see is, and I think the people that could do it is probably only the independents, because the big boys, there's just really no need for them to do that. They can spit out date and time watches all day long. They sell like hotcakes. Is to take modern day technology and specifically put forth functionality that has existed for hundreds of years in a 3D fashion, for example, a 3D power reserve, a 3D chronograph, and something that will spin around all three axes, right? We've seen the triple tourbillons, right? But there was a specific reason for that. And that reason was, okay, we want the watch to be a lot more accurate because the tourbillon is really only effective when it's perpendicular to the ground, right? But I would love to see somebody like maybe Christophe Claret, like Vianney Holter, take existing modern technology, present it in a mechanical way. Can't even probably imagine what that would look like. What does a 3D chronograph look like? How do you display that? You do have some pieces out there that have tried. Concord did that crazy alien looking piece where they had a sort of a 3D power reserve where the liquid would fill up, going up and down. But there's really no one brand out there that has taken the 3D concept, show new technology using old techniques, if that makes sense.
Maybe Jacob, the Astronomia.
Astronomia from Jacob is probably a close one. But usually what happens is you get something, let's say like this, like the Jean Dunand, right?
It's extremely bulky.
You know, you have these cylinders that are doing that are showing you perpetual calendar functionality. But at the end of the day, I would love to see something simple: power reserve, chronograph, just a different way to display century-old technology, not the old 3 counters for a chronograph, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there like a brand that you think has the coolest implementation of tech in a watch right now?
If we're strictly sticking to mechanical watches, you know, every brand has that outlier, right, where they go avant-garde. Probably MB&F would be the #1 brand as far as I'm concerned, if you want to talk about that. I mean, he's already done some out-of-the-world stuff. And maybe if Vianney Holter wasn't as lazy and didn't drink as much beer as he does, maybe he could come up with some things of that nature. I met him once at Basel, and it was 9:30 a.m., and he already probably downed 6 or 7 beers at that point. And me and a friend of mine who's an AD, we wanted to order some watches from him, and he's like, yeah, I can get you 6 pieces, and I don't remember what the date was, but the delivery was like 2 years later. I'm like, and what am I going to do with these watches 2 years later? Like, I want them today, like in 3 months, 6 months. So Vianney Holter could certainly be one of those guys. Again, Christophe Claret certainly as well. But the leader right now has got to be MB&F. I got to agree with you.
You know, Max actually came to Google and actually gave us an entire presentation on all of his pieces, the history, how he actually came about from his previous like positions, and like how he's actually raised, you know, gone through the entire industry. So pretty.
You know, one thing I love about Max, and you can actually read this right on his website, is, you know, it's Max Buser and Friends. And for Max, he considers every single person that works for him, from the guy that designs watches, puts them together, does advertising, marketing, Facebook, whatever it might be, even to the guys that clean the office. He considers all of those guys equally as important as a part of his company. He calls them all friends, which is really cool. I thought that was a very humble approach to things.
What's one watch that you've traded or sold that you wish you've kept?
Any Richard Mille post 2015.
Okay, no. From a salesperson perspective, yes.
Man.
Listen, if you want to talk about Richard Mille's, I've owned RM11s as low as $40,000 to $45,000. Who knew that this is where they're going to be? But it doesn't really matter from a perspective of price, which is what Adrian mentioned. You're always going to see watches that you've sold for $1, and then all of a sudden they're selling for $5, right? 5 times what they used to be. But I actually did this once with a Juan Pablo Montoya watch, which I was the guy that was kind of single-handedly responsible for raising the market up on limited edition offshores, right? This was a long time ago. They're back down already, but I've seen the Montoya go from $12,000 all the way out to $35,000. I went back into my QuickBooks, literally pulled every single Montoya sale out. For one, I found that I've sold at least 11 or 12 of them twice, 3 times over, which was cool. They came back and sold for different prices. But I found out that financially, there's no financial model out there that will justify holding on to something for an X amount of time, even though you've owned it for 12, it's now 35. Over time, it doesn't make sense, which is why I always say watches are not an investment. But I've owned a Vianney Holter Antigua for $9,000, which I sold for $14,000. Today, that watch trades for $100,000. And it's a watch that when I got it, A, it was working, which was great, and B, The Antigua is the one watch I wish I would have today and have hold on to for personal use. At the time, I was like, oh, it's a little small. It's weird. I know this is a hell of a watchmaker. I know it's a hell of a watch. I wish I would have kept that watch, and not because it's $100,000 today, but because it's $100,000 today, if that makes sense. Because right now, I feel it's out. I won't pay 100 grand for it today just to put it on my wrist at this point. So the Antigua is definitely one of those watches. If I had to come up with something that's a little more of a regular watch, which is the one that they made 12 of? We had the RM009. This was before your time. We had
and if anybody's listening and would like to sell an RM009 at VIP Vault, Ian put my cell
impossible
phone
to get.
number
So they
down.
made
I
12
need that watch.
RM009s.
Willing to pay a lot of money
We came
for it.
across it in the early stage of Richard Mills when the RM11s were selling for $50,000 to $60,000. And if I'm not mistaken, that watch came in the realm of about $250,000, which at the time was stupid money for us, stupid money for me. And today, if anybody has one, you can basically name a price. So that would probably be another one that I wish I held on to.
Hi, I didn't have a question. I don't know how I got on this list, but nice to meet you, Roman, and thanks
Hi,
for
Albert.
taking the time with us. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as to the future of dress watches, because obviously sports watches are super hot, and a lot of us just don't wear, especially at Google, watches for a suit and tie very much anymore. And so how do you see that particular aspect of collecting changing or growing over time?
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to start off with the fact that it's actually a misconception. Dress watches sell, and they sell extremely well. And there are a lot more dress watches out there still being made today than there are sports watches. Of course, living in the world of Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Royal Oak, and I specifically say Royal Oak, Patek Philippe, Nautilus, specifically Nautilus, this is what you see all day, every day. You guys work at Google, you should all know, the effect that social media specifically has on the general public's opinion of watches. It seems like the only thing that's selling is sports Rolex models, sports Nautiluses, Audemars Piguets, right? But it's not the case. I can tell you based on my sales, if I simply ran through last week's sales, I will tell you that 70% of the watches that were sold were dress watches. Another thing which makes this question difficult is the fact that there's a very thin line today of how people wear watches. It used to be that you wouldn't be caught dead wearing a watch like this Patek, with a pair of jeans, right? But today those trends are changing as well. I'm sure you guys all don't wear a suit and a tie to work, right? I'm pretty sure your workspace is pretty flexible, right? Or that of Facebook, for example. And it's the same thing that's happening with watches. But don't think for a second that dress watches are going away. So long story short, dress watches are still popular. They're still selling, and they're not going anywhere. Look, there's 700 of you guys, right? And I guarantee you, out of 700 of you guys, more than half of you wouldn't be caught dead wearing a clunker such as this. Right? Because this is a humongous 48 millimeter watch. This is the concept you guys asked me to bring on. There's guys out there that won't put on a watch that's more than 38 millimeters, because I don't care how big your wrist is. 98% of all guys, a watch that's 42 millimeters plus is already too big on them, unless you want the big look. So the future of dress watches is here to stay, and don't be surprised. Everything is a trend. That's why I keep telling you guys, people that are investing into these Nautiluses and Royal Oaks, you don't be surprised that 5 years from now, all of a sudden, that's old news. Also note what companies are doing in terms of size, even on the sports models. Royal Oaks went down to a 38 millimeter. Sure. Hublot is taking all their watches, they're remaking them from 45, 46, 48 down to 42. That whole wave of huge clunky watches, when that Panerai started, that offshore started, that's slowly dying down. People are sizing down. And when you start sizing down, your next natural choice is going to be a dress watch. So don't worry, if you like dress watches, they're not going anywhere.
Hey, Roman. Thanks for taking the time to chat. And you can blame me for adding the 1518, the 2499, and some of the other watches on
I'll send you some videos of the one that I sold. How about that? We'll do that offline.
That'll be great. I figure if there's anyone in the world that I'm going to come across that has a 2499, it's probably you. But I was curious about how you think about everyday wearability for a lot of watches. Like, I think of Rolex as being super robust, can wear anywhere, built like a tank, knock it around, it'll be fine. But when I think about moving into the world of Patek or other dress watches, Lange, my concern is that they're just not built as robustly, and that on a day-to-day basis, they may not be as wearable. So I wanted to get your perspective on how those watches fare out day-to-day.
Well, first of all, nice beard. All right, love the beard. That's awesome. Second of all, as far as what you mentioned earlier, if anybody would have a watch like a $24.99, as a rule of thumb, and this goes for me or any other dealer out there, the more expensive the watch is, the faster we try to get it out of the door, because it costs money to hold on to this inventory. So every time you get, oftentimes before making a large purchase on a watch, I get Adrian and the rest of my sales team will usually line up a sale, because it hurts financially to have to hold on to watches that are 2, 3, 400,000, a million plus, right? I remember we had a crystal Richard Mille in stock, and this is back when it was, another one I'm biting my elbows over. Where we had a Richard Mille in stock that was $900,000. That was the first crystal turbo. It was actually the #1 piece. We had it in stock for like 2 months, and we started to panic. That's $1 million lined up. So most of the time, you won't find dealers having these a big inventory of these big pieces. But to go back to what you're saying, I'm going to ask you a question in turn. You buy a car, right? Let's say a new car, a decent car, right? I'm not talking about Bentleys or Ferraris. Let's say you're buying a car that's a $75,000 car, and let's not use anybody for as an example. When I jump into a car that I buy, I have never ever worried about the fact that the car is going to break. I am conscious of the fact that it's going to break. There's going to be issues, cosmetic issues, mechanical issues. But in the back of my head, I know that I am a drive from a mechanic shop away from getting my car working the way it is. If I'm somebody who's anal and there's scratches on my rims, I want to go and get them repainted or touched up or even replaced. I get a million questions like this about service, about over polishing, about all those things. My advice is the only thing is this: treat it as if you would treat a car. In the back of your head, you should know that no matter what you do to your watch, right, it's a trip to a watchmaker, a way of getting it fixed. And not necessarily the manufacturer, because they will rip you a new one. We all know that, right? They will do unnecessary work in order to rise up the bill, because there's only one Longate, there's only one Patek, right? You can't shop that service around. There's plenty of qualified watchmakers and watch centers out there that will do the job just the same, not overcharge you. Again, very comparable to a mechanic. You go to a mechanic because you got a flat tire, all of a sudden you need a water pump, a gasket change, this, that, and the other, so a $20 fix becomes a $2,000 fix. It's the same thing. If you take that attitude to wearing watches, then none of this will ever stop you from wearing any watch you may possibly want to. Of course, be smart about it. If you're going to go hiking, don't go doing it in a Patek, right? Put on a Rolex, right? Because odds are you're going to hit a rock or something else. If you're going to go, I don't know, rock climbing and things like that, pick a watch due to its surroundings. But for the most part, even then, I have taken watches, I have put on watches and forgotten to take the watches off, do work around the house and putting nails in the wall and stuff like that. And I know that, look, at the end of the day, it can be polished and it can be fixed. And that's really just the plain truth. Take the attitude of buying a car. None of you guys can tell me that when you jump into a brand new car, or not in a brand new car, that you somehow worried at the time of purchase, and that's what makes your decision for you, that this thing will break. They will break, they will scratch. But again, they're just a small, trip away from a watchmaker and getting them back to as good as new. So if you take that attitude, I think you'll be fine.
And if you do decide to go swimming, please screw down your
crowns.
Yes,
if you're going to go swimming, screw down your crowns.
So you often say watches are not an investment; they're expensive toys, and I totally agree with you. But I don't know that that sentiment is super widely shared. I'm curious if you can talk about the impact that speculators have had on the watch collecting community.
How does one define an investment, right? For me, an investment is defined money invested over time. What is my return per year? So whatever investments I make on a personal level, be it the stock market, be it mutual funds, be it real estate, or even precious metal at times, just to diversify my own personal portfolio, I look at return on my money invested over a period of time, which is usually a year, and that's how most people look at it. And I've had guys argue with me in regards to, no, but I bought this watch 5 years ago. It cost me $10,000. Today, that watch is $500,000. Those arguments usually come from outliers that have gotten lucky. How many of you guys have bought a stock and all of a sudden something happened and this stock went through the roof, and guess what? You got lucky, right? My stock portfolio consists of Google, good job, guys, Apple, Facebook, Tesla, and Amazon. That's the only thing that's in my stock portfolio. I haven't looked in my stock portfolio probably in 2 years. You know why? Because to me, I'm going to look at it when I'm 55. Those are the companies I chose to go with. Those are the companies I believe in, and that's my investment. I know over time is going to bring me that return. Well, tomorrow one of these stocks pops and goes up 2,000%. I got lucky, right? So there's not a single, in general, if you take all watches and you put them all together and get rid of the outliers, and even if you include the outliers and you average it all down, again, the return is simply not there. What is there, and it's not a financial return, when you're able to put on a watch that at least holds its value or even goes up in value over time, and you're enjoying this watch, it's not sitting in your safe, you're enjoying this watch, then it becomes a much better investment, because now it's a passion investment, right, as they call it. So now you're able to wear something knowing that, listen, I parked $50,000 into something that I've had it for 5 years and it's gone up to $60,000, $70,000, or it just stayed at $50,000. Then it becomes a good investment from a passion investment standpoint. That's just how I look at it.
Okay, so here's the next one. What kind of tips do you actually have for working your way up to watches in kind of like the Patek AP kind of ALS realm, right? So should you start small and actually start trading your way up? Do you feel like you should just like save until you can actually afford the one that you really wanted to get in the first place?
That's actually an easy question. It's a question of, how bad is the watch bug, right? Not everybody obviously starts out with a $100,000 Patek. You just have to be conscious of the fact that no matter how you slice it, no matter what you do, no matter how smart you buy or how lucky you get, at the end of the day, every time you trade, you lose. Why? You call me up and you want to buy something, you want to trade something. Whatever I'm buying based on the fact that I'm just buying a watch, right? When I'm selling you something, I am making profit on that watch, and I'm taking the other watch in trade with the thought process of I'm going to take it in a trade for 10 and sell it for 11, right? So by moving up, that very last watch is going to cost you, depending how many steps you take, but let's assume you take 5 to 7 watches to get to your ultimate watch, you're going to end up overpaying by about 20%, 20 to 30%, right? And the reason for that is because every time you trade a watch, there's a little bit of a loss. Most watches you lose money on, right? But at the same time,
sometimes we'll just leave the profit in the trade. Like
exactly.
We'll sell them a watch
now,
and take your watch
like for us, for example, we have a good customer that bought something from us. I'm not going to make him lose money on that. I'll just make money on the other watch. But most of the time, you're going to lose. And the next thing is, if you can live with that, what that's going to do is going to satisfy your watch bug right there and then. Hey, listen, I started with a $1,000 watch, and 10 years from now, you're going to be wearing a $50,000 watch. But in those 10 years, you've enjoyed the watch of horology. So you have to kind of outweigh what's more important. So some people choose to save up and save up, but I think that anything over a 1 year period, I think it defeats the purpose. If you're going to save up for a watch for a year, I get it. But if you're going to save up for a watch for 5, 6, 7 years, I feel it defeats the purpose. And I think by 5, 6, 7 years, you'll kind of lose sight of why you even wanted that damn thing to begin with.
Plus, trends change and stuff like that.
Exactly.
You change, your taste changes.
So many things change over time. So I think 1 year is probably an acceptable amount of time. Anything past that defeats the purpose.
All right, next question. Gerard Perregaux developed constant escapement, right? And we wanted to understand how many of your clientele actually appreciate such kind of engineering advancements, and do you feel like these are actually inflated prices when they're actually hitting the market at MSRP, or should you just wait until they drop on gray?
For Gerard Perregaux, it's actually a funny case, and this is the case where a company took a different route altogether. I mean, I'm not going to get into heavy duty into Gerard Perregaux history. I did a whole episode on them, lots of iconic pieces, lots of history behind the brand. But at some point, they decided to go a bit of a different route, which is quantity with quality, right? Because they're still quality watches. And I know that the one watch you guys are going to ask me about is this guy, right? The very famous escapement that they made. I think in the last 10 years, this is the biggest horological feat in the history of watches altogether, and it is from Gerard Perregaux, right? By the way, did you know Rolex passed on this? Rolex was offered this technology, they passed on it. If they didn't, but this is not the cup of tea. This is not what they do, right? But long story short, you got a company that decided to look, rather than spending millions and millions upon millions on marketing and doing all the wonderful things that all the other brands are doing, we're just going to manufacture watches and we're going to basically close them out. There's not a single Gerard Perregaux in my safe, and I probably have a few dozen Gerard Perregaux in my safe. That's not a closeout price. I own every single Gerard Perregaux brand new below dealer cost. And this is what they do. They manufacture, therefore jacking up the retail prices, right? And now you find these things online 50, 60, 70% off. And if you want to talk about the older stuff, it barely holds value, which becomes a deal for those that could appreciate the nuts and bolts in a watch such as this. But would I advise to anyone to go out there and buy a Gerard Perregaux at retail price? Absolutely not. And oddly enough, you don't even have to look for a pre-owned watch to get a deal on GP, because most of the stuff ends up getting sold through the side door at pennies on a dollar, to the tune of, depending on how popular things are, as low as 16 to 17 cents on a dollar. I have bought Gerard Perregaux. Granted, not these things, right? Not the skeleton Lariatos and things like that. But even the skeleton Lariatos, we bought the PVD ones at less than half price. And that was like the hottest watch they made like a few years ago, you know what I mean? And yet they still make so much that allows them to say, you know what? Their cost of manufacturing is their cost of manufacturers. When they sell stuff off at 70, 80 off, doesn't mean they're not making money. They are making money. So they're starting to manufacture closeout, which I wish a company such as this, that somebody there would just say, let's stop, let's cut off production altogether, let's, by 70, 80%, let's regroup, let's start putting out more stuff like this to get people to appreciate it as they did in the 60s and the 70s.
Hi, Roman. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. My question is, what do you see being the biggest disconnects between what watch buyers want and what watch brands are making and selling, aside from maybe the standard, not enough steel sports watches?
Well, I think the biggest disconnect is, and you do see some of these brands are trying to put that forth, is customization. I feel that at the price that you guys are paying for stuff, one should be able to customize their watches, right? Jaeger did it. It's, I think, still doing it. You had, Vacheron did it with the Quai de Lille models, right? Although, I mean, you could customize a few parts of that watch just based on metals that you want to choose. But I think customization is the one thing that these brands are missing out on. It's not very practical for them, because if people are going to call in and design their watches from scratch, it becomes very unpractical, and charging up for that also becomes unpractical. Vacheron actually tried that with the Quai de Lille. They initially, the regular ones that they put out on their website was one price, and then if you wanted to customize, it was like an extra $5,000, $6,000 or $7,000. And then later they canceled that whole thing because they realized people are just not going to pay extra. But customization is probably the one thing that I think is missing from these companies. I think if you go out to a company like a Patek Philippe and you're buying an expensive perpetual calendar chronograph such as this thing, I think you should be able to order a specific color dial. But again, how practical is that for the company? It's absolutely not. But that is the one thing I feel the big boys are missing out. It's customization. And you can get that today with the independents. You can call a guy like Sven Anderson. You can even call a guy like Christophe Claret. But a lot of these independents, they will do that for you at a price because they're already charging an arm and a leg for these things. I mean, this Christophe Claret that I brought on here, I think retails for like $202,000. If you ask him to make this with a green dial, I'm pretty sure he would, But customization would be my answer.
Sorry, guys, I have to run. I'm going.
We're losing Adrian because his fiance is blowing up his phone, and she's gonna.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Speak to you guys soon.
If he doesn't leave now, she's gonna cut off his what. But all right, let's go. What else do we have?
Oh, I was just going to say, you've done a couple of videos kind of talking about like the COVID period and what the impact has been. But I was just wondering, like, if you have like a kind of an idea of like over the next year, what you see the market doing or like difficulties that you expect to have.
Okay, well, first and foremost, I'm going to take the opportunity in this video to tell all the viewers that I told you so. Because when I put out a video a few months back and I said that, listen, the market is not being affected by COVID. Of course, immediately somebody got offended because they thought I was downplaying COVID. I'm not downplaying COVID. I know people that have been affected by it. It is indeed a terrible, terrible thing that has happened to the entire world, not just the United States of America. And I would never, ever downplay a terrible disease such as this, right? But I was specifically talking about the watch market, and indeed it did not affect the watch market somehow. What it did is it actually boosted it forward. I've seen prices rise, I've seen demand rise, and I've also seen supply decrease. You're gonna see, and again, you guys don't, I always say I don't like to predict, but you're going to see inventory availability. So once these companies open back up, you're gonna see them spitting out that product. Availability would increase, prices will decrease. But again, it's not going to be, oh, something is going to go from 10 grand to 5 grand. It means something's going to go from 10 grand to 9 grand. You're going to see that 10 to 15% fluctuation in pricing. But if the companies are smart, if they have a backlog of production, right, that, listen, they plan their production in advance. It's not like it's planned a month in advance. It's probably planned a year or two in advance. Again, each company does it a little bit differently, but the general thing is that they plan in advance. If they were smart, they would not release that product that was planned for the year and just take that hit. because with them, they watch the market very carefully, and they watch the gray market very carefully. So I would say that in a 6 months period to a year, you're going to see prices dip a little bit on those companies or those products that the company choose to put out in order to catch up with their overall revenue. Because at the end of the day, they're still businesses. And believe me, Rolex is probably not going to be the one to do it, because, hey, Rolex has a backlog order for gazillions of dollars, and they're Rolex. Nothing is going to happen to them. But other companies may think otherwise. They may say, you know what, let's not put those watches out that we plan to produce. Let's keep the hype alive, so to speak.
Hey, Roman, you mentioned earlier Vacheron's production being way down. I'm actually kind of curious what's going on with them in general, and then specifically, I've always admired their perpetual calendar chronographs. I got to try one on at one of their boutiques in London when I was traveling, back when you could travel. And on the gray market, the prices are very attractive, as I'm sure you know, but is that kind of just fool's money that you won't be able to resell because it's such a obscure or unpopular piece, and should you just go for the real perpetual calendar chronograph like the Patek?
Well, you know what I always say? I say buy what you like first and foremost. And if you want to talk about Patek perpetual calendars aren't popular either. Most of them are out there being discounted, right? Unless you're talking about, let's say, the Nautilus, right? Right now, when you say Patek, automatically as a dealer, I'll tell you, oh, Patek? You mean Aquanaut Nautilus? Yes, that's Patek right now. You know, when you got things like 5960s and platinum trading at $40,000 pre-owned, a watch that at one time traded at $90,000 when it first came out, this tells you where the company is. So a lot of the perpetual stuff is not out there. Speaking of perpetuals, did you guys see the new skeleton Vacheron perpetual overseas? I haven't seen that in person, but when I saw the picture, I was like, wow, amazing watch. I think that's a watch that's going to do well. But with like any other brand right now, if you say Vacheron, I have to tell you overseas. Right? That's what sells. But if you don't like the overseas and you prefer to get yourself a perpetual calendar, what do? My biggest suggestion, my only suggestion is always to go out and find the watch pre-owned. Get rid of the hit up front. So if I'm out there ordering a Vacheron, and my cost on any given Vacheron is anywhere from 35 to 40% off, right? And I'm going to hook you guys up and I'm going to say, you know what, I'm only going to make 5 points. I'll sell it to you at 30 off. Right? Immediately take that price and go online and say, well, how much are these things pre-owned online? Look at the online price, subtract about 10-15% because the prices online are a bit inflated, and there's your hit. So then ask yourself a question, am I the guy that's okay wearing a pre-owned watch, or am I a guy that's going to go out there, find the best possible price? Let's say I find this perpetual at 30% off retail, and then I know I expect to take another 10-20% hit. But there is sometimes a light at the end of the tunnel. That light at the end of the tunnel is retail price increases. So let's say you're taking a perpetual, a Vacheron perpetual, let's say, retails for 50 grand, just to make the math easier, and you bought it at 30% off, so you're into this watch for $35,000. A year goes by, 2 years go by, and that you go through one or maybe even two retail price increases. That could be anywhere from 3 to 13%, right? And all of a sudden, the watch that retailed for $50,000 now retails for $60,000. Now in a pre-owned market, that resonates. So now that watch is worth a little bit more. So, and with that, it's a timing issue of when you actually want to sell the watch. Unfortunately, as a watch collector, you guys' timing always sucks because you always want to sell when the market is down on something, and you always want to buy when the market is really up on something. Why? It's human nature. You want to buy the hottest, the latest, and the greatest that's in demand, that's selling for more. And once something becomes less desirable, that's when you want to get rid of it. And that's really the biggest issue with a private customer trading watches back and forth. But the only advice I can tell you is that, you know, if you can live with a pre-owned watch, get rid of the hit up front, and that's really it.
I think one of the things that's kind of like driving a lot of us within our watch tribe is what kind of things can we, I'm trying to bring it back to the charity aspect here for a second, what kind of events and kind of charity-based kind of things that we can actually be doing more of to try to get the community together around this thing that we're also passionate about, right? And we're really interested in teaming up with people such as you and like other people who are passionate about this space as well. And any ideas or creative thoughts are appreciated.
Well, if you want to talk about charity work, for one, I don't have to tell you guys that anything and everything that has to do with horology, you know, everybody raises their hand and says, I'm in, right? I think the biggest benefit of doing charity work surrounding the world of horology is that for the most part, you're dealing, and let me be frank about it, you're dealing with people that have pockets, right? Because this is an expensive hobby, right? And so for the majority of the time, you're already kind of setting yourself up to win because you're now dealing with people of a certain income level. So now those people are actually able to afford to buy watches as well as afford to give. But giving away watches for charity has worked, and it's worked for years and years and years. Look at the Only Watch auction. Look at the last Only Watch auctions. Let's not even talk about the big Patek of how much it realized. Look at the other pieces, how much money that has brought. When you get when you get a bunch of people in the room that are passionate about watches and they're having a chance to own something that is unique, okay, that drives them nuts. The biggest advice to say is to do it live, because what you want to have is you want to have a live audience bidding on the same watch in case of an auction, because there's always going to be 2 to 3 guys in a room that want to show whose dick is bigger, and that's just the bottom line. And as much as I would hate to exploit that, when it comes to charity, I could care less what I'm exploiting, because at the end of the day, that's more money that goes to that charity. So the annual gala that my buddy Joe does, I'm not sure if you guys seen that video. Every year that he does a cancer gala. Unfortunately, this year it was canceled due to COVID. We'll try to catch up next year. I'm like the local auctioneer. You have no idea how many people in that room I made buy stuff, and this is not on a large scale or anything like that. The auction alone raised maybe about 60 or 70,000, which is a lot of money, but not big scale like watches, right? But I literally sat in a room where it was 350 people, out of which I probably knew half, if not more, because it's all local. And I literally pointed guys and said, no, you're bidding. No, you're buying this. You're doing this and this and that. So when it comes to a live environment, I think this is your best chance to raise the most amount of money. And I would not feel bad in front of the charity, in front of God or anybody else by pulling every dirty trick under the sun, because the goal is to raise more money.
I think that's everything, right? Do you all have any more questions?
I'll have one more question to wrap it up, if that's cool.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Hey, Roman. So I've only been collecting watches for 5 years, but in that short amount of time, I've made quite a few mistakes. Bought like reloomed vintages and bought on days when like terrible things have happened as a way to quell the pain, so to speak. But I would imagine in your line of work, you see a lot of people who've learned from their mistakes, or who have sort of perfected what they think of as the art of collecting for them. Any wisdom you could share for those of us who are relatively new to the space, who are thinking about their next pieces and want to continue to make better decisions?
Here's what I'll tell you, and I'm glad you touched upon vintage, because we didn't really talk much about it. Vintage is something that I'm very passionate about, but if you go on my website, you don't really see a whole lot of vintage. And the reason for that is exactly that. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. The vintage world is a very, very, very dirty world, especially when it comes to vintage Rolexes. You have watches being put together, dial swap, reloomed, fake dials, wash dials. There's so many things that can happen. I just received a vintage sub from a client of mine for which he paid an arm and a leg. A watch that's normally supposed to trade at about 15 to 16,000, but the watch was only worth 8 because the dial was reloomed. What kills me about the vintage world is that because the end consumer gets so caught up in, oh, dial is made, or particular bezel, or particular crown, or so on and so forth, due to the nature of the beast, because again, certain dials they made less of, certain bezels they made less of, that the value of the watches fluctuate based on the simplest parts, right? But it's justified because, once again, the fuchsia bezel, right? It was only made for 2 years, so that's why that GMT trades for, you know, $25,000, depending on how clean and if it's complete. The only advice I can give is the same thing, is to do what I do. I put my trust into those that really, really know their shit. And that is, you guys see me collab with a gentleman by the name of Adam Menta, mentawatches.com. He's the kid that I trust. This guy was an attorney, like went to law school, practiced as an attorney and everything else, left being a lawyer, decided to sell watches. There's a few more other guys that I deal with whom I really, really trust. If I am not 100% on vintage, which is why you don't see me sell a lot of vintage, majority of the vintage pieces that I deliver to clients, we just delivered a Comex watch, probably the best example of a Comex out there, right? Before I delivered that watch was in Adam's hands and floor. It cost me thousands of dollars to ship it back and forth, but I checked every single part of that watch, every single thing before I delivered it to a client. Because the worst thing you want to happen is have somebody like you come back, oh, wait a minute, dude, you sold me a reloomed dial. And then you got to kind of back out of it, which is why I don't do a lot of vintage business. I'm probably going to start maybe with some kind of a partnership with Adam. I don't know yet. This is something that me and him have been talking about. But it's finding somebody that you really, really trust. And unfortunately, the only way you find somebody you trust is through experience, and you will get burned along the way. Because again, not every vintage dealer is out there to screw you. Not every vintage dealer has standards. So for somebody that says, listen, I want a vintage 5513, right? A certain dealer is going to say, well, it's relumed, it's a touched up dial, who cares? The watch looks great, here you go, it's 15,000 bucks. Well, another dealer is going to say, well, you know what? Because it's a relumed dial, because it's a, you know, a service insert and things of that nature, he's going to say, here's this watch, know that this is what it has, and therefore it's not $15,000, it's 12 or 10 or whatever it might be. And so it's not necessarily, I'm not trying to single out vintage watch dealers and say that they're all crooks. I'm just saying that different vintage dealers have different standards. And because my standards are the highest when it comes to that stuff, because I myself am a vintage guy, so when I buy stuff for myself, I want to make sure it's like perfect, right? So I tend to keep higher standards. But, you know, there's an old saying, and my father's always taught me this, and he's always said, listen, you know, smart people learn off other people's mistakes, and dumb people learn off their own mistakes. Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 people in the world always learn off of their own mistakes, myself included. I've made plenty of mistakes when it comes to vintage stuff, sort of an impulse buy, then later to find out that, you know, I overpaid. So find somebody you trust is basically what it comes down to, and learn. You know, you should be able, if you're somebody that wants to dwell in the world of vintage, read. Unfortunately, internet is not a good place because internet has a lot of biased information. So books are, I always plug my friend Georgia Mandani. I know her father, I know Georgia personally. I think to me, they are the authority when it comes to all things Rolex. So just by picking up a few of her books, you can certainly learn a lot and you can look for those things, or in the very least, ask the right questions, if that makes sense.
You actually wrote the foreword for one of those also, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. One of those, I wrote the preface on that. And when she reached out to me, she's like, hey, Roman, I want you to write the preface. I said, Georgia, I said, you know, I'm as far from the world of vintage as possible. What the hell do you need me for? She's like, no, but I want you to write a preface. So I just basically ended up writing about, you know, what the gray market has done for the watch industry, which I think we are really responsible, very, very much responsible of how big the watch world has gotten. You know, the internet guys, when we started this almost 20 years ago, and there was like a dozen of us, you know, everybody thought we were crazy by doing this, but here we are. I think we quadrupled the damn industry, if you ask me.
Hey, Roman, I just want to say thank you on behalf of Watches and our entire community and the YouTube community in general. I think we all really benefit from the information that you're sharing, how open and transparent you are with it. And thank you to Ian and your entire team and everyone and Adrian for coming today and making this possible. So thank you so much.
Take care,
Guys, good to see you all. Nice meeting you all. Nino, thank you so much for setting this up. I'll see you guys on YouTube. Wait, I'll see you guys on YouTube next week. And I have one last question for you, Nino. Which one of the 700 people has a contact in YouTube so this video makes it onto the front page? That's what I want to know. But we'll take that one offline. Well, for all you other YouTube fans that were not on the Zoom call with me, well, for one, I want to tell you this. If any of you guys or viewers out there are part of some sort of club, and you guys ever want to do this with me, get on the Zoom call and talk live, I am more than happy to do so. I'm pretty sure this episode has ran fairly long at this point. Again, lots of questions, lots of people on that Zoom call. It wasn't all 800 of them, thank God, because this would have never ended. And for those of you that have gotten through this video and watched it to the very end, I appreciate you guys sticking around. Other than that, guys, as always, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video for those you think may enjoy my content, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.